paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Softly hear from a whisper so near, slowly stirring sweet muses from night's fall. Round, round and around, suddenly soaring higher, higher, blazing a sound, sweeter. Fly so high, over time slipping by, in a flow of desire reawakened. Bells suddenly sung, bound to a wild and stirring night, to the halls of crimson.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host Mike White. On this episode, I am talking with producer Christine Lamont all about, well, two of her films, the 2024 film Viva Verdi, as well as the 2025 film Weiwei's Turandot. Yes, opera is back in a big way. And these are some great documentaries that you really need to check out. Viva Verdi, wow, it knocked my socks off. You will probably hear me gushing in this interview, and with good reason. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy. I want to know a little bit more about you before we start talking about Viva Verdi. How did you get into the business?
I think that it really started from the spectacle of mass, because that whole thing when all of your senses are involved, from the sense of the sight, your audio, and the smell of things, the incense that's there too. So I think that whole thing, being immersed in a whole different world, I think that's where it started. And then I remember going to my grandmother's for Sunday brunch or lunch, and I would beg anyone to take me to the movies. And then I would beg them to see it again, to watch one with me, because I love those worlds. I love the colors I was curious about so many things, and these were new worlds that I was being introduced to, and I was maybe only 7 or 8 at the time, and that's where I also fell in love with opera with my mother, my grandmother making sauce, and having Mario Lanza and Caruso playing these red vinyl albums of theirs, and Verdi and Puccini, especially. So that's kind of where I fell in love with opera. And I think that it just happened. I think if you follow your passion, I've always been around music, and I worked at the Jazz Workshop Paul's Mall in Boston. I don't know if you knew about that, was like the premier jazz club in America at the time. And so I think that started, he had two little small theaters that we used to put these great films in. That was another way that it started. And also when I was in college, I didn't join very many things, but there was an international film club. And every Friday night they would show 2 films, and whether it was Wild Strawberries or Tokyo Story or Black Orpheus, my favorite film, all of these films were exciting to me. And I knew that I would love to be involved in those creative worlds of, being involved. And I always loved behind the scenes. So it just was a natural fit for me, I think.
I think before you got into producing things, you were what, mostly marketing?
Yes, I did. Yes, and I think that's obviously I fell into when I was at Boston at SAC Theaters, working there after the Jazz Workshop Pulse Mall. I was hired to be the director of publicity and promotions for SAC Theaters, was 83 theater chain, and that was really fun. And the studios would come, and we would do these I love promotions. So we would do tennis courts and all these great promotions in the streets, and I think one of them was the Brinks job, Universal's The Brinks job. We did a big premiere there. And after that, they asked me if I would be interested in going to New York to be the East Coast field rep. So I was the East Coast field rep there. And of course, moving to New York was exciting and what I always wanted to do. So it was perfect. And that I did that for a while, and that was so much fun to do promotions and publicity, and I would travel to Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, so I got to know the press there and got to travel with a lot of producers and directors. So I always felt that I was learning at the feet of the masters, and things that you can't really read in books, right? Like Casa Verde, you can't read in books those things. So I was very lucky to be with them and able to ask questions. We'd be in limos going from one place to another, and I'd say, "What did you think about this? And how did you manage that?" If that question wasn't asked, I would ask it. So I was lucky to have those lessons too. So that was an inspiration for me. I was the field rep, and then I was a director of publicity at Universal. And then I moved to New Zealand with my husband. And I went to Disney first, and I was the director of publicity and promotions there. And that's when Michael and Jeffrey Katzenberg took over, and they just were building a New York office. There was one person there. So I built that office and hired people. And after 3 years there, which was great because they had all these wonderful films from Touchstone and the regular Disney films, that I loved animation, learned a lot about animation. And as I said, I was really drawn to the directors and the directors and producers, which is always exciting to me, always interesting. What was your creativity and what was your process of getting these to the screen? And I was also talking about that to the press when I was promoting those films. So I learned a lot. And then I moved to New Zealand and helped launch New Zealand 3, TV New Zealand 3. So that was kind of an interesting strategic move. Then when I got back, I was about to start my own PR company. It was my birthday, I remember, and I had all this great stationery, and I was about to launch it, and Charlie Glenn called me from Orion, and he said, "We want you to come on board and head up our marketing and publicity here." And I said, "I just made up my stationery for my own PR company." He said, "Tear it up." I said, "Okay." So I tore it up, and so did Orion, and those were really favorite days working with Arthur Krim and the people that team that were there. We were a very small little team, and especially after working at Universal and Disney, there were maybe 7 or 8 of us that were really leading the charge here. But we worked really hard and smart and strong, and we had some really great films. I mean, we had Dances in Silence, and those were back-to-back Oscar sweeps. That was pretty amazing. It's this having a strategic mind. I think having a studio background really is like kind of like being in the army. They, you really know exactly, how to go about being strategic and precise and not make any mistakes if possible. So it's a good lesson. It's a good learning post for sure.
So how did you make that switch into actually producing things?
I started to do went to Rogers and Cowan, and I was the head of the film division there for about 5.5 years. And when I finished with that, and I did a lot of things, I brought on books, I brought on theater, I brought on a lot of things to add to the motion picture division. And I love performing arts, so I had an opportunity to do one small film. It was called Dandelion Dharma. So I really kind of got my chops on that. That was great. And we won an audience award at Palm Springs. So that was really a fantastic, reward or confirmation that this is working and you should continue in that. So that was great. Then I love theater, and a dear friend of mine, Gary Goldstein, had been writing really wonderful plays and books. And he said, "Do you want to do this with me?" And I said, "Yeah, it sounds great." And that was Three Grooms and a Bride. And that was wonderful. We had 3 extended runs. It was about these 2 great gay guys whose best friends, a man and a woman, were getting married. And they said, "We want to get married too." But this was a long time ago. It was like 2004, maybe. And so it was new and exciting, and we had a great run. And DeSalvo started it, and it was just great fun. I love the challenge of, okay, how do we make this happen with this very little budget, and how do we get this out there? I've always liked that. It's a little bit of manifesting. You really have to think and dig deep and ask questions, and you come up with something and you make it happen as best you can. I think that was part of it. And then I segued into the small film that I did, that I won at Palm Springs. And then from that, Yvonne Russo, who I had worked with at Rogers and Cowan on a film that she did, Naturally Native, she called me. I was living in Rome at the time with my husband, 2012. And she said, she's a meditator, a Buddhist, Ramne Ringo Q. And she said, "Listen, they told me to call you because you need to be involved in this film." And I said, "Okay." I didn't ask them who they were. I just said, "What else did they say?" And they said, "This is the deal. It's in Milan. It's Casa Verdi, the home that Verdi built, and it's an older generation of Italians." And I said, "Sign me up. You don't need to say anything else. I love this idea. Everything about that is appealing to me." And I had been studying Italian and living in Rome with my husband, so to continue that journey in Italy, to live and work in Italy, was always a dream of mine. So I said, "Wow, this sounds great." So we were back in America, my husband and I, and Yvonne and I flew the next May, 2013. We flew to Milan and got permission. Yvonne stayed, she was still working. She stayed that a week. I was there for about 3 weeks, got permission, did some footage, and we created a little bit of a reel and a development reel, and did an Indiegogo campaign, raised more money, went back another time, and then went back a third time. So in between all of that, we were able to find 5 featured guests that we followed in the film. But there were so many wonderful stories, Mike. You can imagine these great people that were living there that were larger than life and had stories of victories and losses and loves and passion and all over the world, because they had played it all and performed it all over the world in all the great opera houses. And my husband and I happened to be great opera fans, so we had gone to many of those houses, many of those great opera houses. So it was so exciting to see things that I love kind of come alive in their stories, right? So that was beautiful. And so we put together this reel, raised some more money. As I said, went back a couple times and had some great editors that we found. Federico Conforti, wonderful editor, Italian living in LA, and Dariana Cordili, also an Italian living here. So we brought them on, and they added their elegance and their beauty. And especially Federico, he used to cut to music. So one of his films, All That Jazz, or I think that's just a short film, it's wonderful, and it was cut to music. So he really understood that, and they both knew the nuances of Italy and Italian and body language. When Angelo Loferoso goes, he does this amazing little sprout right of this beautiful sound aria. And then he goes, "That's all I've got." And so they were able to capture those. And Yvonne and I both have a great sense of humor, but a lot, especially Yvonne's got a great quirky sense of humor. And you could see that throughout the film. And we went through a lot though with raising funds and with the pandemic. And we were, at one point, we were editing in Parma, in LA, and in New York. Yvonne was in New York, I was here. And our first editor, Federico Rodelli, was wonderful. He started in Parma editing with us, the first string out. And that was great. And that's when I sent one of my friends introduced me to Nick Pike. We're all Academy members. And we were at a luncheon one day, and Ellen Rich, who's now an EP on our film, said, "Nick, I think Christine's got a great project you might like," because, they talk about these, especially music documentaries or music films. So Nick said, "Send me something." So I sent him a little bit of a trailer and these 11 minutes that Yvonne and I had put together. And he really responded to it. He loved it. And really a couple days later, it wasn't very long afterwards, he had written the song and sent it to me. And I said, "Oh, this is like it's been inspired and divine inspiration." So I sent it to Yvonne and I said, "This sounds pretty great, Yvonne." And she said, "Oh yeah, this definitely is exactly what she had in mind as well." So we hired Nick, and that really helped move along our vision. Every once in a while with a documentary, you've got to go back in and say, what do we start with? What was our vision? What was our intention? And so that helped us to kind of solidify our direction. And it everything that song represents is right. The Sweet Dreams of Joy was what we were working on and dealing with and recording every day when we were taping these wonderful stories that they were telling us, these dreams that they had still that they could enjoy at Casa Verde, but dreams that they had before. We would be in music therapy, and you could see them thinking and mouthing the words to these songs that they remembered.
I imagine you were at a little bit of an advantage doing a documentary about performers. There was probably not a lot of hesitation from these people because they're used to being on stage.
That's so right. They weren't loved being on stage, and they loved being in front of the camera and telling their stories. They were authentic stories, and you could hear their authentic voice come through. They were filled with so much reverie and so much passion and wistfulness in a way. And so happy to be able to tell us about it and show us their reviews and show us their albums. It was delightful. It was like being in a movie. Actually, it was like watching this. As you said, they were actors on a stage. And Claudio Giambi, who is bigger than like baritone, he was an actor. He passed away in last August, and we fell in love with him. But he was an actor on stage and in movies. And obviously what you bring to opera is a big part of that. Being an emotional performer helps with your work on stage as well. What you're singing, your opera, your arias, for sure.
How did you kind of determine the 5 people that you followed the most?
We were following a few other ones as well. There was a really wonderful Beppe de Tomasi. He was a conductor, an opera conductor, actually. And when, let's see, it was for The Godfather 3, and Coppola came to Italy and he said, "I want the best conductor of opera in Italy." And they said, this Beppe de Tomasi. So we had a wonderful, wonderful recordings with Beppe. And he had everyone, like all other residents, they all had little altars to Verdi in the room because they were so grateful to Verdi for saving them. And a lot of them didn't have pensions, in the 40s, 30s, and 40s. And so they were there very happily and appreciative. And in Beppe's little altar, there was Coppola. There was a Verdi, Coppola, and Andy Garcia. And we had such fun with that. And so he told us all these great stories. And we have wonderful footage that we haven't used yet. I think we're still very ripe for a TV program, actually, with more footage and interviewing newer residents that are there and some of the young students that are there as well. As there's such rich stories that are so hopeful and inspirational and full of life and love and passion, because they share these intergenerational, younger and older generations love music. That's what they bond with. They talk about it all the time. If they're not playing it, they're talking about it or teaching it or learning it. So you just love to be around there, Mike. Honestly, when we go there, it's like we don't want to leave. We want to sleep here at night. We want to stay here. We're our applications so we can fill them out and come and stay here when we're ready.
It must feel like you just got your batteries recharged every time you go there.
It's true. It's very true. That's a nice way of putting it because there's such energy. I mean, opera and music is great energy. In fact, that's what a lot of Claudio Giambi teaches is that energy work, coming from deep inside your diaphragm and coming out. And that's actually what Chitose was talking about too when she was doing her exercises and coming from a deep place. I think it's sacred work. I think music really moves things. And Verdi obviously knew about that. There's the Verdi Ah. Do you know about the Verdi Ah?
No.
So most operas were written in 440 hertz, and he wrote all of his operas in 432, which is the universal sound. So the amen and the ah are that sound, that megahertz. And so that's what he wrote in. That's a very uplifting, it's very beautiful music. I think Puccini's is beautiful too, and his is in 440, but Verdi's is even sweeter, or it touches a place inside of me anyway.
Well, that's the thing that I just so loved about this documentary is just how you see the passion and it feels like it rubs off. Like as I'm watching this documentary, I'm being uplifted. And it's not every documentary that can just make your heart soar.
Ah, that's so nice to hear. We felt that way too. When the movie goes on at every one of our screenings, I can't leave. I want to watch it again because I think I feel that way too. I really get moved by their stories. I laugh, I cry. I feel, it's so beautiful too. Milan is beautiful. The home very spared no expense in creating that. It still really as beautiful as it was before. And there's just that energy that you feel. You get as you said, you get uplifted by this wave of good feelings, and especially when Jambi's teaching the young students and they're creating their own energy, right? Their own sound, and they're off by a lot, and he lets them do it, and then they all laugh and enjoy. They adore him. They just love the lessons that he's giving them, which are life lessons too. You have to try things, you have to show up, you have to be there, and that was his gift to give as well, these life lessons. These young music students learned they came from all over the world to do this, to study with him, including Massimiliano, who was in Germany and who said, that was my whole dream, was to work with Claudio Giambi and to learn from him. And he said, I know you can't learn this in books. It's only here. And Claudio was a really wonderful teacher. I loved watching him teach. It's so beautiful because he gives you instruction and then he applauds and then, celebrates you. It's so great.
You talked about the pandemic. How did that affect the production?
As I said, we had to stop everything and then but we were able to put together a string. We did a paper cut and then we did a string out of all these special scenes and sequences, and we were able to get a rough cut. So that it worked well in a way, and we learned to work on Zoom and Frame.io, which was wonderful. And it was a great process. I love editing, and I actually became a much better cook because of editing, because you could be very brave and bold. And Yvonne and Federico, we all said, let's try this. Let's try going this way. Let's put this over here. We took our time because we had time to do that, right? Otherwise, sometimes you're in a hurry to get to a festival or for whatever reason. But we were able to really move things around, have different cuts, and it affected my life as well. As I said, it was a good thing. You just have to take those challenges and make the best of them that you can. And I think we did. We used the time really well, and we were together and we're holding hands. Yvonne and I were held our hands from day one on this all the way through, and it's really paid off. I think to be persistent and to be relentless and to be passionate and embracing and just go with the flow of what's happening the best you can, right? And say yes and do what you can. So we had all these great great stories that we could have followed. But when we went back a couple years later, some of them ended up on the fourth floor, which was the floor where there's more assisted living, and Alzheimer patients were there. And Beppe de Tomasi ended up there, so we couldn't continue. When you start interviewing people when they're 91, 88, things happen. So you have to learn how to pivot a little bit. But we had so many great stories to follow. And we had the blessings and the love of their family as well, who gave us great archival and that were part of what we were doing. We always invited them to come and be a part, and we'll watch this. And we gained their trust right away. For me, I always think that Italians are part of my family because I grew up in such a big family, and it was always like 22 of us at Sunday lunch at my grandmother's. My mother had 7 brothers, and there were 2 other sisters that she had, so big families, a lot of cousins. So when I meet Italians, I always think I must be related to them. I just feel, comfortable. And so being with them, I just fell in love with all of them. It was so easy. I speak some Italian, and I was able to make them laugh, and they were able to make me laugh. So they were so much fun. So I think gaining their trust, and we only wanted to respect Verdi's legacy and his contribution to the world in his music and in this beautiful home and his humanitarianism. For me, he was a humanitarian before anything. He really was so generous and kind, and such a great man, very humble. He didn't want this to open until after his death. So he didn't want people to write about it or talk about, what a great man he was. He was really incredible. He's one of my heroes for sure.
I love those little animated sequences with him in there.
Oh, I'm glad you did. Yeah. We went back and forth on that. I love animation. And in fact, Yvonne has directed some animation. She's into animation as well. And I grew up with animation, and at Disney, it was one of my favorite things. I love animators. They have a great sense of humor. They're always hiding little symbols of little things in there, and I just love texture also in documentaries. When we had a graphic artist that did some of those movements, and I also love the shift in music. I love when all of a sudden it's Brazilian music and you're dancing in your seat, and then it goes to another rhythm, another feel, another sound, another shift. And I like that. I like that in any kind of music, any kind of film, documentary, or just a narrative. So there are really a lot of things that I appreciate as a filmmaker that we brought, that was kind of interesting, a little different. And these are stories that we were more observing this world, these lives, and reporting back to the world. And this is how this segment of this population lives in Italy, in this one particular incredible house that Verdi built. How beautiful is this, and what a blueprint it can be for the rest of the world. And that we always thought that. Yvonne and I said, this really could be a blueprint. Maybe we could help make a difference and make an impact on third act of life. So important. And a lot of people have been calling us about this, who are licensing the film to retirement homes and music schools and opera houses. It's touching a place right now. There's a lot of boomers anyway, but also our world needs light and love and beauty and music, and wall-to-wall music is what our film is all about.
When is the first time you see this with an audience, and what was your response to that?
Okay, the first time that we saw it with a real audience was in Woodstock. That's when we premiered our film. That what a great audience. I mean, Mira Blausine did such an amazing job. It's really a kind of a music-centric, if you will, festival, and there's all these artists that live there, musicians, and so we had a great audience, and they went wild for it. They loved it. It was beautiful. And the same in Santa Barbara, very similar audience, a little bit more opera-oriented, a little bit more sophisticated, a little older audience maybe. And they had to put an encore screening on because the audience response was intense and immense, that I know exactly we're so happy with it, of course. So to then do Q&As where people rush up and are crying and say, this really moved my life. It really touched me. How can the rest of my family see it? I want my parents to see it. I want my grandmother to see it. So that is very encouraging when you spend 13 years making a film, when you have a reaction like that, you really feel that you may have been on the right road and taking the time to be exact and perfecting. And Yvonne and I were, we just said it's not ready until it's ready, and we didn't feel that until several iterations later. And I know people were saying, "When's the film going to be done?" And it's not cooked yet, but when it was done, we looked at each other. We said, "That's it. That's the film." So I was really, really happy to have a good partner and a film that brought great joy to my heart, music. Yeah, I remember being at studios working on some, I don't know, some westerns or, crime movies, and you have to see them thousands of times over and over. And, it was fine, but with this, it was such a joy to watch, and my husband was really happy because instead of guns and other things happening in my room, my studio, there was all this beautiful Verdi music coming out, and Nick, who created great music score-wise as well, I think to go toe-to-toe with Verdi is a very daunting thing, and Nick's music was just seamless and beautiful. Really, I love what he did for us. I was really happy that I was able to bring him in and that our friend Ellen introduced us and that he was a part of our journey.
The song that he wrote for you specifically, this is now nominated for an Academy Award, correct?
That's right. And how wonderful too that the music branch embraced such diversity because it's from K-pop to techno music to our beautiful aria. And I think we're maybe one of the first arias ever nominated. How wonderful that is to be represented like that and to be embraced. I know it'd be great. I think it's good for audiences to stretch a little bit and hear different things and see different lives, different worlds, different cultures. It helps change your mind about things. And, if you weren't thinking about your grandparents, even if they're not in a retirement home, even if they're at home with you or in their own home, to, be a little bit more appreciative of what they have to offer. They've lived through a lot and they are masters of whatever. And so it's good. I think it's a good thing.
I know the award ceremony has changed over the years, but is there going to be performances of the songs? Do you know? And I don't know if you're at liberty to talk about that.
Right now, it's not totally settled on what's playing. We hope that all of them would be certainly, they're all five beautiful, incredible, different films, different, as I said, very diverse. So we would hope that they'd all be represented. They were all nominated. We hope that they would all be shown. I don't think it's been decided yet, so we'll see.
I was hoping you could maybe name drop who might be performing that.
We hope that Anna Maria Martinez, who recorded it for our film, she's a great mezzo-soprano and she's incredible. She's from Puerto Rico and really, and she was the voice on Mozart in the Jungle as well. So she has a great following that's very young following from that series, as well as a huge opera following. She plays all over. She's a wonderful human being too. I just adore her. She's kind and loving and wonderful, very intelligent, very eloquent when she speaks, and her performance is stunning. I've seen her perform many times at the LA Opera. And we're hoping that that's it.
So, as you are working on Viva Verdi, you're also working on the Turandot film as well, Ai Weiwei's Turandot?
That's right. That just happened. What happens sometimes, and you just have to be prepared because, I started on, as I said, Viva Verdi 13 years ago, and what happened, these concentric circles like that happen in life. So I was living in Rome with my husband, and I met Maxine Derivenko. He was 21-year-old student, film student, and his mother was a friend of mine, and she said, "I have a filmmaker's son. I would love it if you would look at his film and tell me what you think." And so I said, "Sure." So I looked at his film and it was really so brilliant, so artistic. And I said, "Your son is really, really talented." So I met with him and I helped form it a little bit. And he got into some festivals, won some awards. And so when I was in 2013 up in Milan, we needed a cameraman. And I said, "Maxime, you've got to come and be our cameraman." He said, "Okay." He came up. And then Federico Rodelli, I hired him to be a PA, but he happened to be also a great cameraman. So the two of them were our cameramen. And when we started doing even the development reel, you could see and a lot of that footage is in the final film. You could see very sensitive because these young Italian men and women are very learned, especially in the arts. So they really understand philosophy. They can sing any aria, and they just have an eye because they've been trained. They've been educated in the arts. So both of them added so much to this. And then Yvonne brought on Jacek Laskis, who worked with Robert Altman, and he does amazing work. So he did a lot of those really close in interviews. Beautiful, very beautiful cinematography. He comes from Poland, from the Polish School of Cinematography, which is, known for its incredible breadth and beauty. Yeah. So he brought his great skills to Maxime and Federico's. So what happened is after working on Viva Verdi, Maxime worked in Rome at the Rome Opera House, being the head film and video person. So he did a lot of interviews with the conductors and the directors of the operas. So he knew that Ai Weiwei was coming, and this was just a few years ago, maybe 10 years after we worked together, but we were very close. He's like family with me. And so he said, this is really resonates for me. And he met Ai Weiwei and he talked to him because Maxime's father is Russian. And he left Russia when he was a Russian Bolshoi ballet dancer. And he fell in love with an Italian woman. And when you're at that stature, you're not supposed to marry outside of Russian women. So he had to leave the country. So Maxime really kind of understood the question of freedom of the arts and expression. He kind of grew up with that. So he and Ai Weiwei had great conversations. Ai Weiwei was also, his father was a poet and exiled, and Ai Weiwei was with him as a young boy, exiled. And there was nothing there where they went in Siberia. And so to him, this beauty of art, and it was such an important statement that is for everyone, and he really took that on himself. He represents every man. So I thought, wow, this is going to be really special and different. So Maxime called me after they filmed a couple days. The Rome Opera House was shut down because of the pandemic. And that was the first time it had happened in the 125-year history of the Opera House, through wars, through all kinds of things. So Maxime didn't know whether they were going to continue, what was going to happen. But they went back in 2022 in March. And they had Oksana Livnev, who was a Ukraine woman conductor, the first time they've had that at the Rome Opera House. So a lot of firsts here. So he went back and they only had 9 days of performances, which is unusual. And that was it. And that's Ai Weiwei's first and last foray into the arts of opera. That's it. So, yeah, so although they did film that, you could see that on Rise 6 if you have that capability. So Maxime got these great intimate interviews. They understood each other, Maxime and Ai Weiwei, and Ai Weiwei was very generous and kind and forthcoming with him. So these great interviews, and to see Ai Weiwei talking to these other artists, to see how they collaborate, their conversations, was such a special thing. So he called me when he was starting to do interviews in New York, and he said, I need you on board. I said, don't ask twice. I love this idea. So Marta Zaccarone, who's executive producer, and my co-producer, we formed a co-production company between Italy and US. And so we decided, we're going to do this together. And it was my first co-production. And I learned a lot. It was a very interesting process because there's no treaty in America for US Italian co-productions. We did these interviews here and in a few other places in Belgium. And then we hired an editor who was terrific that Maxime had worked with. He did a lot of music videos. So he understood editing to music. Again, it's what's so important in these documentaries. So we did that, and we came to a few different cuts, and Marta and I gave some notes, and then we talked to Andy Cohen, who was also Ai Weiwei's executive producer on some of his movies. And I said, Andy, I've got this great project. And he said, count me in. So he became an executive producer, brought some great funds so we could continue on. And then he brought Julian Lennon, an activist, right? So he came on as an executive producer. And actually, Andy came on as a producer, and then Julian as executive producer. And then I brought my friend Marcy Polier on as executive producer. We're all kind of acted as we understood what was going on because Weiwei, is expressive and his philosophy is through his art. So we understood what was happening, but we were so knocked out and so happy with what he was doing. This beautiful, beautiful opera that he performed, these sets that he designed, and these costumes and the projections that he did that gave kind of a modern twist to things, and that incorporated thoughts on immigration and the war and COVID, all kinds of things. So we were really thrilled about that. So it went pretty far. We had a very robust festival run. We were in Copenhagen at CPH Docs and in Toronto at Hot Docs, all these great reactions. And again, Mike, it was something where they had to do encore screenings because people insisted that they see this movie. People had been talking about it. So that's always a good sign. And I love doing the Q&As when people come up and say, we are hungry for these types of movies, this type of fare that's unusual and sophisticated and is about something and challenges our thinking. And so I felt that with both these films, that both these operas, these Verdi and Puccini operas that were, all of a sudden reaching different audiences that they've never reached before, younger audiences, different audiences, film-going audiences.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, especially here in 2026, that opera is still just such a vital force in so many people's lives.
I know. Mike, you must have seen the Olympic ceremonies, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
When it was such a beautiful thing for Andrea Bocelli to do Nessun Dorma, which is our ending aria that Michael Fabiano, is so amazing when he sings that. And to see Verdi on that floor, also that Olympic floor with Rossini, and it was very exciting for us. I think opera's having another moment. Not that it went away, but things ebb and flow, and there's cycles of music and movement. So I'm very happy that opera is being more accepted and listened to and appreciated and respected. It's a beautiful art.
So what's next for you?
I have another Italian documentary, and it's actually with Federico Rodelli, the other cameraman that I had on Viva Verdi, right? So he's doing it's in post-production. It's called Children of the River, Figli del Fiume, and it's about the Po River, the longest sacred river in Italy. It's about three men who live along the banks of that in search of different things. One's an ex-priest who's there. One is an alcoholic who's recovering in there. And just a man that is sensitive and serious and believes in UFOs and other things. And they look at the river as a sacred, as a mother, almost symbolic. And so it's very philosophical. It's slow cinema. And so there's less verbiage, less dialogue, a lot of beautiful scenes. And it's really artistic. It's an artistic approach. It's philosophical in many ways. So it's good.
Do you have an idea of when it's going to be out?
We have a rough cut. I just need a little bit more time now to get through March, and then we could jump back in and finish it. And then I also have my husband's book, Justice Deferred, that was at Warner Brothers. That's back to me. It'll be a feature narrative film. So make a little shift there and to narrative. See where that goes. It's a great book. It sold really well, and Putnam had it. So we'll see what happens with that. But I'm open. This has been a really wonderful time to be able to bring all my experience at the studios, and even theater helps, everything that you learn along the way, to be able to contribute and make a difference and bring all of that to both these films. It's been really rewarding for me and a very joyful experience on both films. To be working with Puccini and Verdi at this stage of my life, it is feel very blessed, very grateful, lucky.
As a film fan and moreover just a human being, thank you so much for these two films, because they really just add so much to the world.
That's so nice, Mike. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ms. Lamont, thank you so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate this.
I really had a lovely time, Mike. Thank you. Anytime.
Soft, softly